Hey guys, Sincel here. Welcome back to the channel. We're continuing the ultimate guide to Gwent today with part 2, building your first deck and resources for the novice. Since I originally planned on making this video, a couple of balance changes have hit, and the list we'll be covering may not remain at the top, but I stand by my point regardless in saying that it's one of the best lists for a beginner to craft since it has a very straightforward, easy to execute game plan. The list, of course, being big monsters. Big monsters revolves mostly around playing big, powerful units through boosts or base power plays, but it also leverages the Thrive mechanic to gain passive points with every play. This serves as your first introduction to what's known as an engine. Engines are cards which, over a longer period of time, passively generate value. The faction with the highest prevalence of engines is Northern Realms. These cards, and decks built around them, favor long-lasting rounds and match up where the opponent has very few tools to remove them from play. Thrive cards gain a point of value every time an allied unit with a higher power than their current value is played. Our Thrive engines for our Big Monsters deck are relatively weak compared to some other engines, but they provide enough passive value that they're important to make use of in difficult matchups. There are other variations of this deck which are becoming more prevalent in the meta as well, most notably a Beasts archetype. So check some of those lists out if that sort of thing sounds interesting to you. I'll put a link down below in the description for those of you who want to build an exact copy of the deck I'm using for this video. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's start with the bad. Our deck's main weaknesses center around two things. One, we have very little damage or removal to push enemy engines off of the board, and we can be easily outpaced in a very long round. And two, we are susceptible to decks which hate on tall units, due to our reliance on the dominance mechanic for many of our cards to see full value. Dominance is a card mechanic which requires us to have the most powerful unit currently on the board for the ability to function. Despite these weaknesses, our deck is still one of the best decks in the game currently because of its advantages, which are consistent high-tempo plays. We can put down an absurd amount of value onto the board play by play, and this often leads to us being able to overtake our opponents in few cards, giving us card advantage. Tempo is a term used to refer to the immediate value a card provides either through its base value or effects it has on other cards. Since we play many high-value cards, we maintain high tempo with little required setup. Card advantage is very important in Gwent, and can be especially helpful to our deck. Card advantage simply means that you are the last one to play in a match, giving you the last say. For us, however, it's especially important. If we want to play a tall unit as our final play in a match, we want to play it last so that the opponent has no chance to remove it. This often defines a win versus loss situation for us. The second advantage to our deck is its ability to outperform almost every other deck in the game in a short third round. This goes hand in hand with the high tempo, card advantage generating potential of the deck. Before we play a match, let's just do a quick overview of the deck and some of my card choices so we can understand some basic abilities outside of the key ones which we've already mentioned. Alright, so now that we are in the deck overview, I'm going to be doing things a little differently. I'm just going to be kind of freestyling it. I'm not going to be doing it off a script. That way we can just go through this, get through it quickly, and then get into the gameplay. So we're going to start from the top, work our way down. This is going to be a Woodland Spirit list. This is a monsters leader, okay? So the reason that we are playing Woodland Spirit, it allows us to boost a unit in hand and get the final say with a 12-point unit usually, sometimes a little bit less, but you have a very large final play with Woodland, and generally that's what you want to do. You want to save this as your finisher. You have other win conditions, but this is one of the ones that you want to try and, play close to the chest, right? Keep it for your final say. Old Spear Tip is a staple of Big Monsters decks. He's the tallest unit, I believe, in the entire game. Yep, he is. So naturally, if we're playing Big Monsters, we're going to be playing the biggest unit. No ability, just a lot of points all at once. But because we play this card here, we have even more synergy with this. We'll get to that in a sec. Old Spear Tip Asleep is the other version of Old Spear Tip, also a no ability card, fewer provisions, and just as good for value. This is your provision costs. We went over that in the last video. And you can see that here we get 9 points for 10 provisions. Old Spear Tip is 15 provisions for 12 points. Some people opt not to run Old Spear Tip. I personally still like to include him. The provision cost is still very good, and it enables some other units that are potentially very synergistic with him. So I would keep that in here. So next, Proto Fletter. This is a very good card, one of the best cards in the Monsters lineup of cards, especially for our deck. You can see that we have a dominance mechanic. So dominance with this card allows us to drain a unit. We really want to take advantage of dominance here, but if you have to, Proto Fletter can still see good 7 points of value to remove an engine. You're just not going to get the added benefit of the drain. You should almost always have dominance with this deck. There are going to be times when you don't, but it's better to shut down the engine in, let's say, a Northern Realms matchup. It'd be better to shut down the engine early than let it run away from you trying to get the extra 3 points out of dominance. It's just not going to be worth it in the long run. We didn't cover deploy yet. Deploy is pretty self-explanatory. Whenever you play it, you use the ability. You don't get to wait to use it. You have to use it immediately. If there's no valid target, no valid enemy unit, the ability doesn't work. Dominance, they've changed the way this works in the most recent patch. Dominance now requires that you have the highest unit already on the board without this unit. So what I mean by that is dominance used to work in such a way that if there were no units on the board, except for, let's say, a 3-point enemy unit that we wanted to drain, if you played this card, you would gain the dominance effect, you would do 3 damage, and you would drain that 3 damage. Now, if you played this with no units on your side of the board, you would not get the drain. Because dominance, you do not have the highest unit on the board. Your opponent does. Slight change, but it makes pretty big impacts on the way we play some of these cards. Geralt of Rivia, a very good card. A staple of many decks. Although a lot of people are opting not to run this, I still like it because it makes the mirror, which is a matchup where you're playing the exact same list. You both are playing the same deck. It makes the mirror matchup very easy to handle, as long as you play this right. Pretty self-explanatory here. Whenever you play it, you can destroy an enemy unit with 8 or more power. Alzur's Double Cross. There's no reason you shouldn't be running this in this deck. This allows you to get Old Spear Tip Asleep, even Brewis. It allows you to get at least 6 points of value most of the time, usually 12 or 9. Azrael is another great card, and one of the ones that I mentioned we have synergy with at the beginning. The reason this is an important card is it allows us to consume a unit in one of the graveyards. So let's say we play Old Spear Tip Asleep in round 1, okay, just to get the value out there. And then we go into round 2, round 3, whatever, and we need to get points on the board to be able to keep our card advantage, right? Deploy this and then consume a unit in your graveyard. You can consume this, and then now you've just played a 10-point Azrael. Another useful use for Azrael is to play him to consume an opponent's unit. This is mostly useful if you're playing against Nilfgaard. You want to try, if you're going into round 2 and they pass, and you're going to be going down a card, you want to try and consume their Roach. You should consume Roach to prevent them from getting their combo with Vivian and a Sire. It's a very useful play, and I would definitely recommend doing that. I would actually almost recommend doing that over consuming this against Nilfgaard. It's a little bit more specific, but I think you get the general idea of this card. You can use it to basically control the graveyards a bit, as well as put a lot of points onto the board. Imlerith's Wrath. This works similarly to Geralt for us, in the sense that it is very tall unit removal. This card finds good value because we almost always have like an 8 or 9 unit on the board, sometimes even higher. Usually always an 8 or a 9. And with our leader, we could actually line this up. So we could get as much as, well, I mean, if you really wanted to think about it, you could boost Old Spear Tip to 20 and get 20 points of removal with this, which is almost always going to be overkill, but you could do it. Brewis and Wispus and Weavis, these are part of a group of cards that have synergy with one another. Every faction generally has some cards like this, and there are also neutral cards like this. This is the power combo for monsters. It received a little bit of a nerf recently, but it ultimately is only about a 4-point difference, and they're still worthwhile to run. You can swap these, though. That's kind of personal preference. I personally like to leave them in. I still think they're very good value. But Brewis is usually something you want to play out in round 1. It's not very useful for us in this deck, but one combo that is very important to take note of. If you have Ozrel in hand in round 1, and you have nothing in the graveyard because it's round 1, let's say your opponent hasn't taken anything off the board. Let's say you have Old Spear Tip asleep, Ozrel, and Brewis in hand. You could play Old Spear Tip asleep for 9 points. Consume it with Brewis to put it in the graveyard. And then consume it from your own graveyard with Ozrel. A lot of points right there, and it's a very easy way to use this card to build up a graveyard. Plus, you enable better value on Weavis and Wispus by playing Brewis. Weavis is pretty basic, boost an allied unit. Just use this to try and maintain dominance so that you always have the highest unit, because a lot of our cards rely on that. Wispus, damage an enemy unit. This should be saved for when it is needed most. This is one of the few tools of removal that we have that doesn't require a tall enemy unit. So Geralt is very conditional. He cannot remove low value engines because he needs an 8 or more power unit to be able to even work. Wispus, on the other hand, can work and remove 2, 4, or 6, depending on how many other Crones you've played, value units. I generally play Brewis in round 1, so that this is up to 4 points, and then I'll use this in round 2 or 3 to remove a low value engine, and then I'll play Weavis to maintain dominance whenever it's needed. Alpha Werewolf, good card, pretty basic. Immunity is pretty self-explanatory. The card cannot be directly targeted, but do note, a lot of beginners make the mistake of playing immunity thinking that it can't be damaged at all. It can. If the opponent plays indirect damage, such as Weather onto a row, or maybe Lacerate, or a special card, or some card of some sort that does not directly target a unit but still does damage, that damage will affect Alpha Werewolf. It just cannot be targeted. You also cannot boost this card on your own. You can boost it in hand with Woodland Spirit, but you cannot boost it once it's on the board because it is immune and it can't be targeted. This is in the deck because of the Thrive mechanic and its synergy with Woodland. I'm running a Thrive-based bronze package. We'll get to that in a minute, and I'll explain that a little bit more. But for now, it's important to note that Alpha Werewolf is your only immune unit in the deck. If you're worried that your opponent might have tall unit removal and you don't have the last play, let's say you lost card advantage, the one unit you want to try and get to boost is Alpha Werewolf. That way, they can't use Geralt, they can't use Leo Bonhart, they can't take any unit-based removal and remove Alpha Werewolf. They would have to be running a special card such as Scorch, Curse of Corruption, something of that sort. And even then, Curse of Corruption probably not going to do it. Cyclops. So these only have one unit they have synergy with in the deck. That is Foglet. When a Foglet dies, it will summon a copy of the unit from the deck to an allied row. This is a mechanic known as thinning, or I guess a concept known as thinning. We'll get into that more later in a later part of the guide, but for now, all you need to know is that getting cards out of your deck is important because it ensures that you have a higher chance to get the cards you want in later rounds. So we run Foglet so that we can kill it with Cyclops, pull the other card out of the deck wherever it went. It'll pull the other copy of Foglet out of the deck, and then we can save our last Cyclops for removal onto engines or something like that. That's ideally why how you want to use Cyclops. The only reason they're in the deck is because we don't have a lot of removal, and we want to be able to get rid of engines, or else we're basically just going to be fucked in a long round. Wyverns, another form of damage that also has the Thrive tag. So you want to try and play your Thrive units in order here. This is a 3-point unit. It's going to be one of the later ones you play. If you need to use engine removal, prioritize using maybe Cyclops onto your Foglets first and then Wyvern, just so you get a little bit more Thrive value. But ultimately, it's not going to make that big of a difference. It's just something small to note. Wild Hunt Riders. These are a very good card. They did receive a nerf recently, and with the nerf to the dominance mechanic that I discussed a minute ago, these also got a kind of an indirect nerf. But they're still a good card, and you should still run these. Dominance, obviously we know that you have to have the highest unit. That's pretty easy to maintain with this deck. But remember that now with the change to dominance, you cannot play this unit on an empty board. It will just fall flat on its face. It will not function, and the summon ability on this card will not work if you don't already have a unit on the board. Otherwise, though, this card should generally be played in round 1 or round 2 if you play into round 2. And that provides you with thinning. It'll pull the other copy out of the deck, as well as a pretty decent play. 6 points. Drowners. The reason I run Drowners are for their movement. Moving an enemy unit to the other row is very important. Many cards rely on being played on a specific row to even work. These allow you to completely break that mechanic. Very useful card to have. They also have damage tied to them, and as an added bonus, we get Thrive from them, and they're a relatively low unit. Drowners are a very good card. Necker Warrior is probably, arguably one of the weakest, if not the weakest cards in the deck. It's a basic 4-point unit that gets Thrive. Play this whenever you don't have another play you want to make. That's basically the play. Bruxes, these are another very conditional card. They will gain Thrive if you use Death Blow. Death Blow will only give us Thrive if we kill an enemy unit with the 2 points of damage. These are a harder card to pull off with this deck, but we do include them because of the Thrive synergy, and the added removal is an extra bonus because, again, we don't have a lot of removal. We have a little bit of damage, but it's not enough to generally remove a card in one go. Neckers are a close contender for the second worst card in the deck to the Necker Warrior, but it's important to include them for the Thrive. These are just going to spawn a base copy, so it'll basically play 2 copies of the card when you put it on the board, and you'll gain Thrive value from both copies. If they stick, if they stay on the board, if the enemy doesn't, or if the opponent doesn't remove them, hey, it's a very good value card. Otherwise, it's not usually going to be that great. At this point, we've covered all of the cards in our deck, most of their abilities, and some general abilities that help us understand the basic mechanics for proper gameplay. In part 3, we'll play our first match and do a turn-by-turn analysis of the game to understand exactly why and how we play our cards. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, and giving me some feedback. If you want to see me play this deck and more, as well as other games, check out my Twitch. That's all for now, guys. Thanks again, and have a good one.